Before we start, let me clarify that the midterm we have on Friday will not cover any lectures that have not been given by then. The reason I have to say that is that we're a little bit behind, and so if you just go by what the course calendar says, there are a couple of lectures that we will not get to before the exam, and obviously even I am not mean enough to include that material. So the second midterm will cover everything up to the implementation of the 1924 Nationalities Act, the Reed-Johnson Act, which we'll either get to today or we'll get to on Wednesday. So we'll probably have a little bit more material on Wednesday. Part of what we cover on Wednesday probably won't be on the exam, but the 1924 Act is a really natural place to stop. That's when this growing enthusiasm, we say, the growing restrictions movement finally is successful. So 1924 is when, not the year 1924, but the act, that 1924 Immigration Nationalities Act will stop. Yes? Yeah, just the stuff since last midterm. Do that. So you can forget everything about colonial Virginia. Okay. So today we're going to finish World War I and the Red Scare, and then we're going to briefly review all of the legislation between the Chinese Exclusion Act and World War I, and then we'll move on and get to the Nationalities Act, which are in a sense a reaction to World War I, although as we've seen, they're also the culmination of building nativism. So where we left off, I believe, was with the Sedition Act of 1918, which is really an amendment, a set of amendments to the Espionage Act of 1917. And we don't need to spend a lot of time with the details. This is kind of the high watermark of the paranoia, and this act is ultimately repealed in 1921. I believe so right after the war. It doesn't last very long. Disloyal, scurrilous, or abusive language about the form of government of the United States, the Constitution, the flag, the uniform of the U.S. military. This is obviously a pretty severe attack on free speech, and as I mentioned, it's somewhat a reaction because some of the cases that had been tried on the basis of the Espionage Act of 1917 had been thrown out, especially those by a judge named Learned Hand. He's the one who was most famously principled about this matter. He viewed this as an act of free speech because he said if one stopped short of urging others to violate the law, one should not be held to have attempted to cause its violation. Remember? So the 1918 Act strengthens that, and it takes out this language about trying to cause people to do something. It just says saying bad things, saying mean things about the flag is enough to land you in jail now. Right? So for our purposes, what's important is that this tells us how, in 1918, how hysterical the country was and how hysterical Congress was. Also, in 1918, Congress passed, along with the amendments to the 1917 Espionage Act, the Entry and Departure Control Act. And this one figures interestingly importantly in the Red Scare that we'll talk about shortly. It provided that immigrants who became anarchists after arrival in the U.S. could, upon warrant of the Secretary of Labor, be taken into custody and deported. Right? So two important pieces about this. First, after arrival. Right? So if you contracted your anarchist tendencies even in the United States, you could be deported. What that means is any immigrant who has not yet become a citizen can be deported on the basis of anarchist beliefs. And those anarchist beliefs are going to be up to the Secretary of Labor. It's upon warrant of the Secretary of Labor. It's not something that has to be proved in court or admitted to. So there's not a lot of due process here, and this obviously makes in the hands of a dishonest Secretary of Labor, this can obviously make an immigrant very nervous. When World War I ended, lots of things happened. World War I, as I mentioned, was clearly a very big event in history. It really signals the beginning of what most people think of as the 20th century. So in Europe, we saw the birth of the existentialists who question the transcendent meaning of morality or anything. We saw Nietzsche, who argues that humans are a species sort of halfway between apes and something that he calls the Übermensch, and that what society does is stand in the way of the real development of humanity, of this Übermensch. And ideas like equality and Christianity are very contrary to humans. And finally, one can talk about Freud, who's also current at this time. His argument is that human beings are really governed by unconscious drives like sex and aggression, and that civilization is something he submits to only reluctantly and only because he needs to in order to stay alive. But the more advanced a society, the more civilized people become, the further removed they are from their real unconscious drives of sex and aggression, the less happy they are. Okay, so you can kind of see how these things are ways of explaining why a civilization that was so full of optimism, so strong in the belief of progress, could suddenly go off the rails and kill each other in such huge numbers for such questionable purposes. Meanwhile, in the United States, the reaction was more isolationism and a kind of repugnance of Europe, perhaps a renewed repugnance towards Europe. Peace, it was sudden, it was fragile. Technically, it was an armistice, not a surrender that ended the war. And historians looking back may well see it. The interwar period is indeed a period of just disarmament in between, in the middle of a continuing war. The roots of World War II, I'm saying, are really in the end of World War I. But it was also a betrayal of American values. Wilson had sold this war as a war to end all wars, as a war to restore democracy everywhere, and so on. Progressivism, in short, the progressive agenda. And the way the war ended did not really suit that. The United States famously did not ratify the Versailles Treaty, and also didn't ratify the League of Nations. So Wilson's dream of a League of Nations that would police the world kind of fell apart. It's not entirely a coincidence that the politician most responsible for killing the League of Nations was Henry Cabot Lodge, who was also an IRL member and a leading immigration restrictionist. So these two ideas, isolation and immigration restriction, are quite naturally tied together. Other things that happened at this time also made people nervous. There's a rapid demobilization, so unemployment, and essentially a depression hits. 2 million troops are demobilized within 6 months. Unemployment shoots to 11.5%. And this is an era where there are very, very little in the way of safety nets. The unemployment insurance and all that stuff is from the Depression, which is still a few decades away. So this signifies a significant amount of suffering. There's also labor unrest, and there's also the influenza epidemic that killed 600,000 Americans, as well as race riots and bombs, which touch off the Red Scare. You can get a decent picture of it when you download it. You can see this is a San Francisco residents at the end of the war parading to celebrate the armistice, and they're wearing masks to protect themselves against influenza. to get a sense of how awful this was, maybe that's a slight digression, but I have a good map for it. There's a map of Chicago showing the deaths from influenza and from pneumonia, which is clearly related, in Chicago in 1918. I'm sorry, from 1 week, a single week in 1918. All the dots here represent deaths from influenza. So again, this is all to the point that what we have is something quite unsettling. And on top of that, you have bombs. So in April of 1919, there were 37 bombs that were mailed to government officials, to wealthy capitalists, including Rockefeller, and the mayor of Seattle, who really is more of a government figure than a wealthy capitalist. And all these bombs were defused, which I think is kind of impressive. They must have been rather clumsy about that. There were also bombs placed directly, and one of them was at the home of Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer. The perpetrator in that case was an Italian immigrant, and a note was found ranting about killing capitalists and so on. As a result, or perhaps simply inevitably, many of these bombs were blamed, most of the bombs were blamed on foreign influence. Foreign influence is synonymous almost with anarchists. All of these bad ideas, just like the germs that came from influenza, all of these evil things are coming from abroad. That's sort of part and parcel of the xenophobic isolationist ideology of the times. Right? So foreign influence is blamed, and blamed also for the May Day riots, which are not so crucially important. I have some cartoons, quite a few cartoons, and I'm going to just go through them quickly. They're all drawn from this period of the Red Scare, and that they all kind of summarize this idea that the United States really needs to crack down. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. You can download the slides and look at them yourselves to get a kind of feeling for what people were thinking about at this time. Belgium is a reference to the Germans attacking Belgium and the atrocities there. Anyway, at the height of the Red Scare, Attorney General Palmer, whose house was bombed in the last slide, read the Immigration Act of 1918 and took seriously the executive power to deport immigrants who had radical ideas. And so in November, he arrested 600 in 11 cities and deported 249, and in 1920, 6,000 were detained, and 600 were deported, including some well-known anarchists like Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman, who had also been convicted previously of conspiracy to urge people not to register for the draft that would be under the 1917 Espionage Act. But surprisingly, after the Palmer raids, here's Alice Palmer's house having been blown up. Surprisingly, after the Palmer raids, though, the Red Scare dissipated quite quickly. By September of 1920, there was a huge bomb exploded on Wall Street in New York, and it wasn't. No one blamed the anarchists for it. It was things had already settled down. So it was a year. It really took just one year to blow. And part of that is that the economy is now picking up, and so many of the fears of revolution had dissipated. The influenza epidemic was over, and so forth. But still, it's somewhat surprising how quickly the Red Scare came and went. The last effect, perhaps, might be the trial of Sacco and Vanzetti. In 1920, they were Italian anarchists or socialists, perhaps. I'm not entirely sure. They were convicted on very, very skimpy evidence and became famous martyrs to the cause. Also, I'm going to argue that this, perhaps not the Red Scare, but the general tensions of the times certainly contributed to the 1921 and 1924 Immigration Acts that we'll talk about in a second. Any questions about World War I? Okay, then let's see. Okay, then we can move on to the period after World War I, which is the period of immigration restriction and implementation. The main point is that the xenophobic isolationist aftermath of World War I, immigration restriction may have been inevitable. But as is generally the case with immigration legislation, the new laws had consequences beyond what Congress may have intended. And specifically, well, there were actually several of them, but the one I'm kind of hinting at is that what happens in the interwar period, because of the way these laws are written and because of the people in charge of implementing them, the possibility of saving European refugees from Hitler is slim, and in fact doesn't happen. So it's simply the bigoted nature of these laws would contribute to the death toll in World War II. But there are other more subtle points that we will touch on first. So I'm going to start with a recap of the immigration laws up to 1919. We've seen all these laws before, but I'm organized in a slightly different way. And then we're going to talk about the rest of the time about immigration legislation between 1921 and 1929, and these are the Nationalities Act. We'll talk about how nationalities are defined, we'll talk about enforcing the law, and we'll talk about, to some extent, the effects of these quota systems. So to start, at the more or less the beginning, the first immigration acts, we have passenger acts. They're pre-Civil War. 1819 is really the first passenger act, the one that's most important. And what's going on here is that the states have preeminence at this time. It's not clear that Congress can regulate immigration. The Passenger Act, for our purposes, simply meant that we have a record of immigrant arrivals after 1819. It's somewhat debatable whether that was an immigration act. It specified a certain amount of space on a ship that carried immigrants, an amount of space per immigrant on such ships. So it could be seen, and has been argued, that it's an attempt to limit the immigration of the very poor, because they wouldn't be able to pay the passage, which would, of course, go up if more space is required. But that's not universally accepted. After 1875, when immigration is federalized, we start to see federal action. And we have basically three causes: fitness, ideology, and race. So under fitness, we see felons and prostitutes and polygamists, although polygamists, I suppose, could also be under ideology. This is Mormons talking about sufferers of contagious diseases, those likely to become a public charge, and the literacy test. And the literacy test, of course, could conceivably be under race as well. Race was construed in the late 19th, early 20th century. And we've given some time to those. The ideology arguments are about contract labor, which you'll recall was allowed during the Civil War. prohibited shortly after, and then prohibited again, and then again, and again, and again, and again. And of course, anarchists, the other ideologically prohibited category. And with race, we have the Chinese Exclusion Act, which is the first race-based immigration regulation, followed by the Gentlemen's Agreement of 1907 and the Asian Barred Zone in 1917. Or the Asian Barred Zone came as with the literacy, was passed with the literacy test. All right. Just to recap briefly, we haven't talked a lot about the Gentlemen's Agreement, but there are a couple of points that are worth making about it. The main thing is that Japan is treated very differently from China because Japan is a powerful nation. In 1853, with the arrival of Matthew Perry's black ships in Edo Harbor, the Meiji Restoration began. The Meiji Restoration brought Japan from a kind of North Korean-like hermit existence in which people were not allowed to leave or enter into a forward-looking, rapidly westernizing country with imperial ambitions. And by 1905, Japan defeats Russia in a war, making a very big splash and causing Teddy Roosevelt to worry a lot about the Philippines, which the U.S. had taken from Spain in 1898. As we saw in 1906, this is while the 1907 Immigration Act was in conference. The San Francisco School Board segregated Japanese students, and that triggered the failure of the literacy test and the provision to ban the Japanese migration from Hawaii, along with the Gentlemen's Agreement. What's crucial about the Gentlemen's Agreement was that it was not a treaty. It was simply a deal worked out between Roosevelt and the Japanese government at the time in which the U.S. agreed not to ban Japanese immigration, and Japan agreed to stop laborers from immigrating. This was not viewed as a great cost. The Japanese government was not particularly concerned about the rights of Japanese laborers immigrating. The Japanese government was concerned about its stature in the world. It was very concerned about being seen as an equal. And this Gentlemen's Agreement treated Japan as an equal. The U.S. agreed not to ban, the Japanese agreed to regulate. It also had the effect that Japanese immigrants would be Japanese immigrants would look to Japan for the right to immigrate. So the Japanese community in the United States was in fact more bound to the Japanese government than it would have been in the absence of this, because it was the Japanese government who was going to decide whether or not a wife could immigrate, or whether or not your sons, or whatever. If you were trying to have a family member immigrate, it was not the U.S. government that the Japanese in America would petition, but rather the Japanese government. They would be the ones who would agree. Okay? And that the Japanese government did agree, as was part of the Gentlemen's Agreement, that wives and children of U.S. resident Japanese would be allowed to migrate. The Japanese government allowed that, and as a result, 20,000 or so so-called picture brides came. And that, again, sets up another huge difference between the Japanese American community and the Chinese American community. There were no picture brides for the Chinese community, so that became an aging bachelor community, whereas the Japanese population, Japanese community, was characterized by households and families, as brides could migrate. And that meant demographically they were essentially normal, and by the 1940s, by the time of internment, 2/3 of the resident population of Japanese Americans are born in the U.S. and are citizens. Okay. It also triggered the Webb-Henry Act of 1913, which was a nasty little California act that banned Japanese from owning land or leasing land or bequeathing land to their children, or leasing land for more than 3 years, or bequeathing land to their children. It's unclear how they would bequeath land to their children if they weren't allowed to own it, but that is what the law says nonetheless. Okay, so in brief, we have those three categories of laws. We also could see a growth over time in the impetus and enthusiasm for immigration restriction. Maybe the best way to see that is to remember how the literacy test was passed. It started in 1897, tried, almost got it in 1907. It took until 1917 to pass it, and only then over the veto over Wilson's veto. So we have we have this building of restrictionist sentiment, and we have on top of that the post-World War I mood, which was isolationism. Right? And what that's going to lead to are these quota acts. We'll start with the Emergency Quota Act of 1921. It's a very simple act, passed at the end of World War I, out of fear that a fear of an onslaught of immigration that might be even larger than we've seen in the past because of all the dislocation of Europe at the time. So the House version reduces the quota to 3% of the foreign-born population, or in other words, 357,000. Compared to what will ultimately pass in 1924, this is actually a pretty generous law, 357. It's the first numerical quota. This is something that the Immigration Restriction League had certainly thought of before, and never thought they could possibly pass until this sort of superheated post-World War I environment. And then excluded also, as all quotas do, exclude somebody, aliens, that is children under 18, of U.S. citizens. This is the compassionate part, right? So these are people who are allowed to immigrate without respect to the quota. That's what I mean by exclusion. They're not excluded from immigrating, they're excluded from the quota. And it's close relative to the U.S. citizens who get who have filed for citizenship. They have preferences within the quota, so they count against the quota, but they're going to come in first, and other people will have to wait. Intellectuals, artists, and members of learned professions, and domestic servants, interesting. They would also count against the quota but not be stopped by them. In other words, your maid would always be able to come in, and if he or she were above the quota, that would count against the quota the following month. The way these would be done is that there would be a quota set each month, and people could come into the country until the quota was full, and then the ships would be turned away. There's kind of a race across the Atlantic at the beginning of every month. Natives of independent Western Hemisphere nations were residents for 1 year, which was later raised to 5 years. So what are we talking about here?